Welcome back, Commanders Declassified Nation. Yes, it is me, LE. You see my name. I'm Bron Solo tonight. I'm back alone again. My fellows are still on the road. I promise you they'll be back next week, and we're going to have some great Commanders conversation as a collective as soon as they're back. But y'all got to deal with me by myself for one more week. So I hope you enjoy it. Thank you for all the love and support for the last episode. Thank you for riding with me as always. Make sure you are subscribed, that you like and comment everything that we or I do on this podcast, because we want to grow. We want to keep hitting you guys with all of the favorite Commanders information that you guys love and know about. Now, tonight, I got something special for you. I'm going to talk about a couple things Commanders related that I think you guys are going to care a lot about. And I want to see what you guys think about this in the comment section of wherever you're consuming this podcast. I almost said popsicles, man. It's hot as crap outside, so forgive me, please. But all right, first thing I'm going to talk to you about, and I know this really is going to resonate with a lot of you folks, but are the Commanders, in you guys' opinion, doing enough to bridge the past with the present, right? You know, we had the name change. I've seen all the debates about that online. Not going to get into that right now. But just from an organizational standpoint, are the Commanders doing enough to keep the ties with the old Redskins franchise, right? Now, you can't have all of the name because the NFL won't let you, and so the throwbacks are kind of tough, but it kind of feels to me like the Commanders are so completely and entirely disassociated with the past here that I don't like it. I'm going to be honest with you guys. I want to see a little bit more of a tie-in to the past, including our past players too, right? Like, I know what Dan Snyder did a lot of guys wrong, but those days are over with, right? Larry Michaels had a weird case. Why was he around? I know. I get it, guys. But I feel like it's time to mend some fences, right? To build some bridges to the past, the glory days, if you will, because quite honestly, the glory days are still all that we have as Commanders fans. And there are people that have been fans of this team for a very long time that weren't even alive when the glory days were around. That tells you how long ago that was. I was just a small kid back then. But players like Art Monk, players like Gary Clark, players like even more recent players, like just some players from the mid-90s, the early 2000s, LeVar Arrington. I know things went sour with him based on contracts, his radio situation, all that stuff. But shouldn't we build bridges back to guys like that? He played an important part here. It's kind of like the Baseball Hall of Fame thing to me, where like you're just going to act like a certain part of your history didn't exist, but you profited from it. So therefore, you should act like that history is what it was. There's a lot of guys out there that you just never hear acknowledged with this franchise. Mark Rippon. When's the last time you saw Mark Rippon around in any official capacity here in Washington? This guy won a Super Bowl for us. I love the fact that Doug Williams is still involved, but there's a ton of players still out there. Charles Mann was one of the best players that we had on those Super Bowl teams as an edge, a defensive end. They didn't call them edges back then. They were defensive ends. At least from my perspective. Again, I was a small kid, but, he was legit. And so, like, I just want guys like that around our franchise because it helps build the good vibes, right, that we need to become or get to where we're trying to go. So now that Snyder's out of the way, I want to see us really try to make a return to the yesteryear in terms of the presence of the players, right? That kind of embodied what we want to become. Russ Grimm is another one. Joe Jacoby, all these guys. Jim Lachey. What is it about this team that you never hear about those guys being around? And it's kind of weird to me, right? Because most other teams have a lot of their historical figures around constantly, right? Like you can't, like, there's so many different examples I can give you from all these different teams. And it's just like, to us, it's like it never happened. And when we changed our name, a lot of folks said, hey, this feels like it's a completely different franchise. And I'm like, nah, you're being dramatic. It won't be that bad. It kind of does, though. You guys are right. It kind of does feel like a completely different franchise. And that's okay, especially if you never existed through the glory days. You would want a complete segregation of franchises from the terrible period that we had during the Snyder ownership. I totally respect it. But I remember as a young boy in 1991 watching those teams. It was like my first real introduction to football. And it just, man, it blew me away. I was instantly hooked. And I want to continue and carry that with me, right? And a lot of those guys are still doing well in their life. I want them around. And this doesn't mean that I want them in the radio booth or hosting preseason football games or anything like that. It doesn't have to be that way. I just want them around the franchise. I want them visible on game day. I want them visible in the offseason. I want the Commanders franchise to celebrate those players' legacy. You know, we should do like a Super Bowl anniversary parade in DC. That would be awesome. I would go to that and have as many of the old players that are still healthy from the Super Bowl era teams at this parade. You know, and now I know like they bring a lot of these folks back at these draft day parties, but it's like, you know, I just feel like they could do more. And maybe I'm asking too much, but I do feel like they could do more because it's such a great. I mean, we were the absolute, without question, best team in the NFL. Like, how hard is that to grasp mentally right now, considering where we've been, right? But at one point in time, that was unquestioned. We may have had the single greatest team of all time, right? With that Super Bowl team. And it just doesn't feel like that was the case, you know? But I love those teams so much. And look, I will say this, like, I'm not a big, let's go back to the old name because I'm a realist and I accept that that's never going to happen. It will not happen. But we can bring back some color schemes. Look at the jerseys in the the old days with these pictures. Now they've kind of washed some of all the Redskins logo stuff, and so or they can if that's what you really want to do. But the jersey that Rippon has on, that Doug Williams and Joe Theismann, well, you could easily bring those back without whatever logo or representation of whatever that you don't want on there. Just do it without that. I'm a fan of that. Make it happen. So I think that you can very easily tie these things together for the franchise, and still hold true the legacy of the things that matter to fans who have been here for a long time, right? Like there's a lot of fans, just so much to love about the history of this franchise. I mean, RFK, you hear the legend of RFK, right? The stadium rocking and swaying with the momentum of the fan base. It's incredible. But if you weren't there, you would never know it existed. And that's what I don't like about this situation. Josh Harris, if you're listening, Magic Johnson, Mitch Rails, all those guys, let's do better to tie to our history. And if there's parts you need to omit because that's what the NFL says to do, so be it. But let's find a way to bring all this together, right? We don't have to lose our culture and our legacy because of the other problem that the NFL said we had to solve. You know what I mean? There's a way to do both. And I want to see us, as we start to get into this Harris era, do everything we can to build that bridge between these two segments in our franchise's history. I think it would do a lot. We have a lot of fans that are over 40 that remember very well those days, and they want to continue to remember those days. It's not a stain in their mind. It's something to be celebrated. Let's consider celebrating that. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying we got to bring back the old name because I know we won't, but let's consider celebrating that. Speaking of RFK, as you guys know, we transitioned from RFK to FedEx Field. And I was thinking about this as we were a lot of the talk about the new stadium and when it might be and so on and so forth was kind of bubbling out there. But one of the things that came to my mind was, is FedEx Field capable of creating the type of atmosphere that you need to be a top team in this league? My gut feeling is yes, it can, because all you need to be that is a competitive football team. That's what fans care about. But then I think about it a little bit more, and I say, okay, well, the lines at FedEx Field are unbearable. If you go get something to eat in the first quarter, you're not coming back till after halftime, right? There's not enough bathrooms. The prices are crazy. The road infrastructure around there is not great. But when you're in your seat, I think you can build the right environment. All the other auxiliary stuff would need to change and does need to change. And hopefully the Harris Group is paying attention to that. But I think if it's just the field, the seats, which I find to be kind of small and hard and all that stuff, it is what it is. That's NFL stadiums. That's mass sporting events. I think it can create that type of, just cohesive fan atmosphere. I do. Now, there are a lot of folks that go to FedEx much more frequently than I do. I average probably about once a season. The most I've ever gone was the 2003 season. Me and my boy Mike would go to like the first half of the season, the home games for the first half of the season. And I felt like FedEx was kind of jamming. And then, my best evidence for this, I think, is probably 2012. FedEx was real in 2012. Wasn't it? Hit the comments if you were there in 2012 and you kind of remember that season. Let me know if FedEx, like if people were talking about the atmosphere at FedEx as being something that wasn't good enough. I don't know. I'm genuinely saying I don't know, because I don't think I went to any games in 2012. But from a television perspective, it seemed like FedEx was jumping. So I think it can. Now, the other big issue, obviously, is tickets. You already know what I'm about to say. Like, people selling tickets to the opposing teams. Or, to say it in a less accusatory way, the other team getting their hands on our tickets. Now, after, what was it? It was New Year's Day 2022. I think it was maybe 2023, New Year's Day. I went to FedEx Field for the Eagles game. Correct me in the comments on the date if I'm wrong about the date, but I think it was like the day after New Year's or whatever, 2022. I was on the field. I was on the sideline for that game, before the game. And I turned around to look, and we weren't a great football team that year. And all you saw were Eagles jerseys. And I was like, man, this is rough. But then I talked to some season ticket holders. They're like, yeah, this is basically every game, when we're bad, right? But I remember when I used to go to the games back in 2003, a little bit more of the games, more frequently, I should say, like, in the pre-2010s years, right? When I didn't live so far away, didn't have kids and all that stuff. You guys remember the wait list for tickets? It was like, you're not getting season tickets. Maybe your kids can get them, but you're not getting them. Just put them on the waiting list and we'll see what happens. Now, I know some of that proved out to be kind of like manufactured by the team, but it was kind of hard to get tickets. And it was always my dream to have season tickets. And I got old enough to actually get season tickets. And I'm like, man, I cannot make that drive from where I am with the traffic every week, even if I wanted to. It's just too much. It would take my entire Sunday. But anyway, so New Year's, a couple of days after New Year's, I turn around and it's just nothing but green and white jerseys. And they're booing the crap out of us. They're booing the crap out of the team. Jalen Hurts comes running by me, right? And he's like, I don't know. Jalen Hurts comes within like 3 feet of me, and he runs to go to the bench or whatever. And I'm thinking to myself, man, he would have gotten booed so loudly 15 years ago. But he was getting a standing ovation when he came out of the tunnel. It said, "Oh man," I was just like blown away. I'm like, "Man, this is not the way it should be." But I don't think it's necessarily because of FedEx Field specifically, as much as I think it's just how poor of a franchise and all the drama around us. Now, of course, there was that, and I don't know if this was the same game or not, but when like the railing fell and fans fell out of the bleachers or whatever and onto Jalen Hurts, like so, I get it in the toilet situations. And the thing that I think like really drives me away most, or drove me away back when I went a lot, was just all the fights. Man, I'm here to watch football. You want to fight? Go do it in your backyard, right? But I just want to watch football. But if we can get those things under control, I think FedEx can be a decent place to go watch football, and if the team can start to perform. But until then, it's a tough sell. Now, hopefully that starts this year. I think there'll be a lot of excitement. I see a lot of folks buying season tickets. I think we'll get close this year. I think it's going to take time to unwind some of the things from years, gone by. But I think we'll get close this year. We'll see. All right. So last topic for me. I like to keep things brief. And again, thank you for riding with me. But the NFL does their honors program, right? This is like the NFL superlatives. And I was thinking to myself, hey, what better to do when you're riding solo than some projections for who might win some team awards, right? I don't even know if these team awards exist in reality, but I was just kind of going through my mental Rolodex for you young kids that used to house like phone numbers and information, right? But I was going through that and I said, who would fit some of these superlative categories? And I got some ideas. I want you guys to hit the comments and tell me who would be your superlatives for the same categories. Of course, you're going to start with the MVP. And I wanted to say, oh, well, if we're good this year, then that means the MVP would be Terry McLaurin. And then I started getting that receiver bias where I'm like, man, they don't touch the ball enough to be MVP. Should it be the quarterback? I'm like, I'm not doing it. I'm not going to go quarterback either for MVP just because it's a rookie and, the team's going to have to carry him a lot in games. And I'm not going to fall into that trap that only a quarterback can be MVP, right? Not here. I try to do things different. So the MVP that I came up with, if we're going to be a good football team this year, then our MVP would be none other than Bobby Wagner. Let that settle in, right? Bobby Wagner is an amazing linebacker. Yes, he's not as young as he used to be, but he can still play. He sets the defense. He is going to get this defense flying. He's going to have the defense in the right position all the time, and he's going to make plays himself. He's going to have a ton of tackles. I know it's kind of weird, like a linebacker as MVP. Yeah, I'm going with it. Roll with me on this one. I really couldn't, honestly, as I went down the list of people, I'm like, man, who else? Who else? Right? But so if we're good, I think that there's a good chance that Bobby Wagner plays at a team MVP level. Now, remember, this isn't in all the NFL. This is only for the Commanders. Bobby Wagner would be the MVP. That's what I'm saying. Stamp it. Then I said, okay, offensive player of the year. If we're good, who would be our offensive player of the year? Terry McLaurin. See, now we're talking, right? Because he'll catch 111 balls, 9 touchdowns, 1,300 yards. Nobody can top that. If things are going according to plan, then Terry McLaurin will be your offensive MVP for the Commanders. Not for the whole league, for the Commanders. It's starting to make sense. I can tell. You guys like this. All right. Then I said, what about defensive player of the year? I started going to what I believe to be our best defensive players. And I was like, okay, John Allen, no. Deron Payne, no, probably not, right? Frankie Louvu. I think he's going to pressure the quarterback and then make plays at the second level. Our defensive player of the year could be Frankie Louvu. And he might not have as many tackles as Bobby Wagner, but he could have more turnovers created. You see where I'm going? Right? So our best defensive player could be Frankie Louisville. And then one more for you guys, because I'm not going to go too deep into this bag because this is great content for later in the offseason when we start to see these guys on the field a little bit more. But what about most improved? And everybody watching this or listening to this is saying to themselves, well, it's got to be Emmanuel Forbes. If we're going to be good at all, you might be right. But I took a little bit of a left turn on this one. And I said, you know what? The coaching staff. No matter what happens, if we're good, the coaching staff deserves the most improved award. Because Eric Bieniemy was dreadful last year. Ron Rivera didn't have it together last season. Defensively, we fired our defensive coordinator last year. If we're good at all this year, nobody deserves the most improved award above the coaching staff. Save for the general manager. He might too. But I'm going to keep it on the field and say the coaching staff. Now, if this is a players only conversation, then you guys are correct. It's Emmanuel Forbes. It has to be Emmanuel Forbes if we're good. Right? So, what do you guys think? Who would be your Commander's honors recipients, superlatives, if we have a turnaround this year? I want to know. Leave it in the comments. And as always, thank you for rolling with us. Well, me now. My fellas are still chilling. Thank you for rolling with me. Make sure you subscribe. Tell a friend to tell a friend. Leave some comments. We read them. I want to hear about it. Give me your thoughts. And if you're listening to us on audio platforms, share it with somebody you know. I am LE representing the Commanders Declassified podcast. And once again, I appreciate you. Thank you for the love. And let's have a great week. And football's coming soon, guys. Don't you worry. I'm out of here.